On this week's Shoot the Messenger, Blair and Kufuor on freedom and justice. Does Africa need more lawyers and fewer strongmen? Hello, I'm Henry Bonsu, and this is Shoot the Messenger, an hour of current affairs, culture and chat, each and every Sunday between 1 and 2, and on demand at voxafrica.com. On today's programme, a new foundation for African justice. Sherry Blair explains why more lawyers in Rwanda and Sierra Leone are at the top of her agenda. And Ghana's former president, John Agyekum Kufuor, on why time is running out for strongmen like Egypt's Hosni Mubarak. Also coming up, Say My Name. After the murder of a gay Ugandan activist, a new campaign tackling homophobia in the British black community. Later on, we've got live entertainment from Amir Khair, who embodies the kind of multiculturalism our Prime Minister is trying and struggling to get to grips with. But first, let's meet our special guests who'll take us through the papers and offer words of wisdom on our other topics. They are Madeline Young, who's an African policy analyst, and Chidi Oti-Obihara, a former investment banker. OK, Africa policy analyst. Now, this is a growth area, isn't it? Because of all the parts of the world that need analysing, people think Africa is the key place.
Indeed, yeah, indeed. I mean, the amount of attention put on Africa currently is huge, not only because people's concerns for development questions, but sometimes more importantly, business interests, investments, international relations, the need to acknowledge other countries on an equal level all over the world, whether they're developing for the needs of minerals, oil, gas, mining, trade, telecommunications. Now is really the time that people are focusing on Africa all across the world.
And which are the most interesting current countries from your point of view? I mean, where have you been? What have you seen? And how do you kind of analyse it?
Well, most of my work has been in West Africa. I actually have family roots in Guinea, and so I've kind of tried to follow West African politics very closely because of questions of instability, wanting to return to my grandfather's homeland, not feeling safe. And my work has brought me to Nigeria to look at oil and gas exploitation and people's concern over the mismanagement of their nation's resources. Also to Ghana for an example of what a lot of people consider to be good governance of natural resource wealth. So that's where I've been going now, and I'm really interested in participating in this discussion about broader issues across the African continent.
And you've been working for one of the leading think tanks in this country, if not the world, Chatham House.
Yes, I did recently collaborate with Chatham House.
Well, Chatham House rules don't apply here.
Okay.
Everybody can see what we're saying and doing, and it is live. Chidi Oti-Obihara. And it's interesting that you are described as a former investment banker. Is that because you fear for your safety? I'm joking.
No, in your company, I'm always safe, Henry. No, okay. Investment banking is a great industry, and people join it and leave it and join it again frequently. Yes. I recently left it.
Right, okay. And so what are you doing now? What does a former investment banker actually do? Apart from spending his money, or what does he do?
I work as a partner / principal at a firm called Next Rubica. It's an advisory firm. I work on the debt side. So we advise small banks and countries on how to manage their debt positions so that they make the most of what they have available to them. And
there's an awful lot of debt around at the moment, isn't there?
There is. Unfortunately, it's a shrinking pool, but these things have their ups and downs.
All right, thank you very much. Let's deal with the newspapers now. Madeline, you've got the Sunday Times, so let's see what you've got there on the front page.
Yes. Now we're still talking about the conflict in Egypt and the popular uprising. I'm not sure I'm not holding this to the right camera. Yeah, so what we're talking about now is currently there's a bit of controversy over US statements about the Egyptian.
Before we get into detail of that story, look at the picture of that woman there. She's wearing, I suppose she's wearing a hijab or headscarf, and then she's got a white scarf with Arabic writing. But I mean, I think one of the reasons why they chose this picture is because she's an extremely beautiful woman. And they thought, aha, this is interesting, because on the one hand, everyone's worried about the Muslim Brotherhood. On the other hand, here's a woman who's wearing makeup and she's demanding her rights from a secular government, and she's taking power. Is that I'm just wondering if that's why they put that picture on the front page.
I mean, women have been largely absent from the street protests, and partially it's a question of safety.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're not necessarily going to want to send your wives, daughters, sisters out into a field with police officers with live ammunition. I think it's a symbolic photo because we are not really getting a lot of women's opinion.
I've seen quite a
the
few
conflict.
on television, though. I mean, you know, increasingly as the demonstrations have kind of gathered and the number of people in that Freedom Square has swollen,
It is swollen.
I've seen more women, and people are bringing children too now.
Oh, see, I
Or they
haven't
have
seen
been.
that. Okay. Well, I mean, I think now we're seeing that the time is kind of running out for Mubarak, and
Yeah.
people are wondering if he will be willing to leave early. And then you have comments in the international media, like from this U.S. envoy, who said that he should stay until the elections. And I believe kind of statements from large regimes like the United States in that area are kind of dangerous. We wouldn't want to. I don't think the U.S. necessarily has a place in telling the Egyptian regime it should
Maybe,
stay or
but
not.
maybe not, because of course they subsidize Egypt to a great extent, especially the military. So in a way, you know, you pay the piper, you play the tune, don't you?
Right, but isn't that contrary to the democratic control of the government that the citizens would like to be playing, which is why we're having these protests?
And interestingly, it says US at odds, so there's conflict within the US administration over what exactly they should be doing.
Yeah, I think you have a lot of varying opinions. You had some very good points about these different voices coming from Hillary Clinton, from the
Obama,
former- yeah.
from Cheney. I think the really interesting aspect of this is that this is one of the first and clearest episodes where everyone can see that US foreign policy, if you like, doesn't come from a consistent base.
It's been stripped bare by this incident, hasn't it?
Absolutely. There are definitely competing points of view, competing perspectives, and individuals who all want to be heard. I mentioned to Madeline earlier on that Dick Cheney, the former vice president under George Bush, had come out swinging for Mubarak and saying he was a good man, who was a US ally, who could be trusted. And he urged in this sort of generic way that Obama should be cautious in his approach, which I thought was an interesting thing to say, because Obama has been trying really hard to be very balanced.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful thing to see.
And he's
from
often
the US
accused of
president.
being far too cautious.
Exactly.
Not angry enough.
Exactly,
you know?
exactly. And if his detractors were correct, you'd assume that this would be the perfect time for him to step back and allow Hillary Clinton, for example, to do all of the work. And at the beginning of this process, Hillary came out and said that she felt very strongly that the human rights of the protesters in Egypt should be respected. And they felt that the Mubarak regime had strengths and weaknesses, but what was extremely important was that they didn't want to see a repeat of Tiananmen Square, for example, having live ammunition used on peaceful protesters. Now, having set out the US's stall, to then have Obama come out, if you like, to go one notch upward and say human rights are very important, political transition should take place in a certain way.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, it's just a question of how it happens. Was I thought, actually quite deft of the American regime. But then, of course, Cheney had a different perspective.
Well, of course, I mean, a lot of these senior American figures from yesteryear, they've been propping up the likes of Mubarak and others in the region, and that's one of the reasons why the people on the street are saying, we don't want you to support dictators anymore. If you really support us, show you want our freedom and genuine democracy. But let's have a look at one of your specialist areas, Chidi. You've got the Financial Times there.
I have, and to lead it in even more smoothly, I think what's really interesting about the process that we're witnessing is that we've seen Tunisia change quite abruptly.
Yeah.
We're watching Egypt change right now. And the question about this domino effect is who next, what next, and what are the implications? Which brings me on to my story, which is the front page of the, forgive me, I'll move this like so.
That's right, yes. Funds in $7 billion, is that right?
Absolutely.
Emerging
$7
market
billion
exit.
have left emerging market countries in the last few days on concern about the generic risk posed by this, by the pace of political change, but also some more basic issues like food price inflation, unemployment, and the nature of the transition that we're watching.
So who's pulling the money out? I mean, where's the fear coming from?
Well, apparently, many G7 funds, such as Citigroup and Pictet specifically, are quoted in this particular article. Now, they're obviously used as bellwethers for the industry in general.
Yeah.
And the idea is that every time a fund manager makes an investment into any country or industry or sector, they take a view about the risk of that industry or sector going forward.
Yeah.
And this is one of those periods in in history where risk is being reassessed.
And I suspect, Madeline, in your field, I mean, people come to you as an Africa policy analyst to talk to them about risks and weighing up the chances of getting your money out if you put it in at this particular time.
Yes, and you have Tunisia and Egypt's credit ratings have been just going through the floor. And if people know that their investments aren't necessarily going to be safe, for example, say in Côte d'Ivoire, you had the president, well, the incumbent president, wanting to seize the national banks.
Yeah.
And then you have the elected president who wants to close them as well. You have a loss in Egypt from this conflict of, BBC quoted yesterday, $310 million per day. That's not a stable...
The tourists are fleeing, of course, and that is one of their main earners, isn't it? Tourism in Egypt.
What is it, 40% loss of tourism?
It's huge.
Yes, since January. So, yeah, I mean, why are you going to invest in that country if it's not going to be a safe investment? And then you have other investors like China who will take risks, and there are certain costs that the country will pay themselves.
I was also thinking about the estimated wealth of the Mubarak family. I mean, people have been talking about his son and his family having very expensive property in the richest parts of London and elsewhere throughout Europe. I suppose people are going to be looking for the money, aren't they? You know, once Mubarak does flee or disappear, people are going to be saying, he's taken the money from our country, he's looted our money, we want it back. Chidi, can you help them find it?
Nice try. No,
I was thinking about a former Nigerian president called Sani Abacha. People are still looking for his money now. Much of it has been found.
There is a long trail of cash that goes with dictators in various forms to family members as gold bullion in the case of Tunisia weeks ago, which has then apparently been impounded in Switzerland. The broader issues about the economic conditions of these countries keep getting ignored, in my mind, in a really poor way. If you look online and try and find out, apparently the Egyptians in 2009 have a virtually 10% unemployment rate. Now this was with the economy working full steam. As Madeline absolutely rightly pointed out, with tourism virtually dead, with half the banks in Cairo closed now for coming up to 2 weeks, with the economy slowly grinding to a halt while this quite sharp political process takes place, the economic pressures on people are huge.
Yeah.
And they drive the process, but they also make the process last longer and take turns that people don't expect. In Tunisia, for example, I wasn't able to get any up-to-date figures on unemployment because, as you probably know, the protest was kicked off by a young boy who was selling fruit.
Yeah, Mr. Bouazizi, who will go down in history like young Palak did all those years ago.
For starting this gigantic domino effect. And his is an amazing microcosm of the challenges being faced by people in these kinds of regimes, under these kinds of conditions.
Yeah.
Because he's a self-employed trader as a teenager who doesn't have the time or the money to be educated, is pushing against a government that doesn't seem to have his economic best interests at heart, and in the end dies. And that human tragedy lies beneath these bigger
and as a result
movements.
of all that, we're seeing what some people are calling contagion spreading throughout the Middle East, including the likes of Syria, where you would normally never see protests. In Jordan, we're seeing this in Algeria.
And in Saudi Arabia as well.
Even in Saudi, of all places.
Those are very powerful points. The domino effect that everybody's talked about has actually got many risk analysts and policymakers thinking not just about when Mubarak will leave, because it isn't if anymore. He will leave, it's just a question of when now. But what happens next? Apparently, Libya, quite wealthy Libya, with quite a strong man, Gaddafi, in charge.
And huge unemployment.
Had 30% unemployment in 2004. That's...
It's absolutely awful if you consider what that actually means.
The human cost. So places like that, they're not sort of places where these things erupt out of nowhere. The stresses and tensions are there, and they unfurl.
Sooner or later, they bubble up to the surface.
Absolutely.
It makes our problems here in this part of the world, in this country, look fairly meagre, small beer. One of the big events this weekend, and it didn't happen in this country, although the Prime Minister of Britain was heavily involved, was a debate on multiculturalism. And that's something I think you've got on one of your papers, Madeline.
I do. The Mail has an article, just on the second page, which is a bit provocative. I don't know if you can see that here.
Fury as Labour smears Cameron after he attacks multiculturalism. So he made his speech in Munich, of all places, of course, which has got an interesting history on this matter, at a security conference presided over by Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor.
So, I mean, this has come out on the BBC, this has come out in all the national newspapers, and people are responding quite quickly and counteracting David Cameron's commentary. So he's claiming that multiculturalism is a failure. This was at a protest in Luton, is that
Absolutely,
correct?
yes.
Right, and so some people do feel that he's doing this to garner more support from the right.
Well, this is it. So he made that speech in Munich, but at the same time in Luton, in the south of England, of course, which some people have called a hotbed of terrorism. But if you go there, I mean, people are getting on. It's getting on with their lives. The EDL, which is a far right protest group, English Defence League, they mounted their largest demonstration. And do people are people saying, well, this is very, very odd, because on the one hand the Prime Minister is saying this in Munich, on the other hand these people are stirring up hate on the ground, or are people saying, well, there's a symptom. This is a symptom of something, just like what's happening in the Middle East is a symptom of discontent among young, unemployed Muslim youth.
Well, I think it's also a symptom of discontent among the British population, and some people, unfortunately, trying to point the finger at people of foreign descent and foreign origins. And maybe some people are forgetting